Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Service to Savings. Today, we're going to be talking everything TSP, specifically, what should you do with that TSP when you get out? And so, when you ETS or retire, you pack away those medals and uniforms, you have your DD 214 in hand, and your TSP is staring back at you, hopefully with six figures or more, whispering, what's next? Do you cash it out? Do you roll it over? Or do you let it ride? Today, Greg and I will be unpacking why leave it alone is often the smartest play for military folks transitioning out, especially with the rock bottom fees and rollover perks. But we'll also flag when rolling to an IRA makes sense and when withdrawal headaches or inheritance pitfalls may tip you to the fact that it is time to move that TSP. Greg, welcome back.
Hey, Joe, I'm so happy to be here. I love having these conversations, especially with you.
Definitely. I don't know if you saw, but TSP assets the other day topped $1 trillion in 2025. And there are millions of people who are keeping them in their post service. So I was wondering, could you share some thoughts on, how do you start to answer this question on what should you do with your TSP when you get out?
Right. Well, I mean, in my mind, actually, first I have to reflect on that massive milestone of assets because I think the last three households I've met with are all legacy retirees, and one of them actually had a six-figure TSP, but the other two were like, yeah, we didn't bother. We weren't getting the matches. We just chose to build up our Roth IRAs and lean into the pension. And I don't know why I was shocked, like, because it was like, even when I enlisted, the default was, oh, you still have this TSP. Okay, great. You're not going to get a match. But I was like, even though, like, in retrospect, I entirely did my TSP wrong because the default back then was the G fund. They didn't even change the default to the Lifecycle yet. I did all the TSP thing wrong, so I still did the TSP. So then I'm running into these, these captains, these O6s that they're like, yeah, we're just not going to do that. So it is crazy how big it is, but at the same time, it is such an amazing tool. TSPs or retirement accounts in general, Joe, is like, well, what is the purpose? Like, how does this fit into the big picture? Right. Like, so at the end of the day, it isn't about just creating this nest egg. It's not about this cool number on the bottom of the paper that says, hey, you're a millionaire now. It's about creating cash flow, right? Future spending, and achieving your life ambitions. So that's how I start the TSP. Like, does it stay in that account or does it need to go somewhere else is what drives it. And then naturally, because I'm a nuke and you're a PhD and we're in finance, then all of a sudden we really lean into the numbers, which I think we're going to talk about today. So it's what's next? Like, obviously your TSP is a retirement account. Like, that's for income. But do you need that income now or are you saving it for later? What's filling that gap today? And then what's next on your journey? Are you straight retiring? Because I have a couple of households that, as even commanders and
Yep.
captains, they're like, nope, we're done. We're 40 something years old and calling it quits. And then we have others that go on to their honeymoon. Now, granted, I usually see people go into their honeymoon careers, whether it's at like one of the shipyards or they go into government contracting or they transition to some federal employment position, like at the War College or something. That drives, well, what do we do with this account? And it also gives us some numbers for comparison. Like, does your new job have a retirement plan? What are those funds like? What are those costs like? Right. So I think I think that's where I start.
Yeah. So much like you, I start kind of in that same place. So first off, my answer almost always is we should never close out the account, right? Because you just never know what job you're going to next
Mhm.
and whether that, okay, if you are going to a new job, is that 401k going to be a 401k? Because they're not all created equal. And if it's not, you need some place to move that money when you're ready to move it, and the TSP is a great place. So, my default is always leave 1,000 to 2,000 in the TSP pretty much no matter what,
Right. Because the
right?
minimum is like 200, but
Right.
you don't want to be bumping that minimum.
Right, because you have a bad day in the market, you fall below the 200, they close out the account, send you a check. That's the worst case scenario that, we don't want ever to have happen to someone.
That's
So,
right.
and then, I come in and I go, the TSP has really good funds, not very many, but really good funds, and they have really low fees, right? So about 4 bips or 0.04%, on most of their funds. And that's phenomenally low. There's some ETFs that have started to kind of rival that, but you're basically not going to get a better deal anywhere else.
Yeah. And they're really, really well managed. So if you actually go to the TSP website, you can dive into each of the funds and who the managers are, but these are big household names like BlackRock that these professional managers are doing great work. They have management tenure, they have good track records of success, and and they adhere. So there's not a whole bunch of error in like, hey, we say we're doing this, but we're actually doing this. Like they actually are managing these funds appropriately. And, I would love to have a deeper menu of options, but oftentimes, especially in that accumulation phase, simplicity is huge, right, Joe? Like, so some people do like that the life cycle funds, which we'll talk about, but my preference is building out a market like portfolio. And exactly to your point, even when I do make that recommendation, okay, it's time to roll out. I love leaving a little bit of money behind, like $1,000, $2,000 in the G fund, simply because the G fund is such a unique asset, and you never know when it's a better holding pattern.
Yeah, and the life cycle funds. So first off, generally they're really good for junior individuals. So, the life cycle funds are really good, especially for your first decade or two in the service. I was just looking today. So for the 2065 fund, life cycle fund, that is for someone who is born, I think ending in like 2000 to 2004 is the years for that one. Till 2036, it essentially isn't going to change. So you get 10 to 20 years of no changing in that, staying pretty much as aggressively as you could possibly want invested.
And piggybacking on that, like the last time I looked at that, Joe, it actually looked almost like maybe I would overweight the S fund a little bit. And we can certainly get into what the heck we're talking about with allocations and weighting and life cycle fund glide paths and stuff like that. It, last time I looked at those, I mean, even as late as like the 2040, 2045s, the equity exposure looks very much like you would expect the all cap world index to look like between US company exposure and international exposure. So maybe the difference there that of the way that I do it is how much C versus how much S. But yeah, you're right. They designed the life cycle funds very smart.
And I always look at those as, if you're in your 20s, till your mid 30s, and you're like, I don't have enough money to really go with a financial advisor, and I don't really want to mess with this on my own. That is that easy button that you can push, right? And leave it in there. And those are a great place to start and to leave that money. Then if you start to go, okay, I'm a little bit further along and maybe I want a little bit more exposure, especially for those who are going to be pulling a pension and they're using that kind of as their fixed income, and it's something that not a lot of people have. So you can go a little heavier maybe on exposure and on risk, and so you want the life cycle fund may not become the right thing for you. One mistake, by the way, as an aside, Greg, that I see a lot of times is someone will go, I'm going to get some 2050 life cycle fund, some 2055 and some 2060.
Yeah.
And, it just always hurts me a little bit because essentially, especially if you're in that, first 15 years, all of those are the same fund at that point, right? So you're not really doing anything to diversify yourself. And secondly, is if you wanted less exposure, then that's one of those times when you're just going to choose the life cycle fund that has the right exposure for you and go all in on that versus trying to, take this blend of multiple of them and have each one individually possibly changing a little bit. It gets really confusing and it just isn't a great way to put together a portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line up front on that one, it's the life cycle fund inherently is diversified. Adding additional life cycle funds does not increase your diversification. In fact, they are directly correlated. They are going to do exactly the same thing.
Yes.
The internal workings are the same. I mean, unless you try to create like some creative ladder where a tranche of it is like a super early life cycle fund and then the latter half is a super late life cycle fund. I guess maybe that could be a strategic play, but that's not ever what I see. And I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt you like the way that it's all organized and the record keeping. It doesn't even overly complicate things. It's just that's a step you didn't have to take.
Yes. So to start out with, right, TSP, great place to leave the money. great place to at least leave some money so that you have it open as an option to roll a poor 401k from a later employer too. And I found the statistic according to FedSmith, right? About 40% of post-service TSP holders roll those bad 401ks back into the TSP, right? And that gets
Mhm.
them out of those high fees and kind of junk options that some 401ks hold. So I found that really amazing. First off, I didn't think that many held on to it, which I guess that number is over 70% of people
Yeah,
hold on to the TSP.
it's a surprising large majority of veterans that are moving new money into old TSP, which is interesting because then as a planner, one of the first questions we get is, "Hey, what do I do with my TSP?" And just to reiterate, the short answer is, well, keep it until we're in an income phase is usually my default, unless we're doing more complicated tax planning, or not even so much tax planning, maybe estate planning would be more appropriate, or we're approaching the income phase. I do prefer to roll out once we approach that income phase because I have a little bit more control in an IRA than I do in a TSP. But
And those
yeah,
are the two main reasons that I 100% agree with on you. The first one is that income phase that I'll get you to talk about a little bit more in the other. Just not to rush over that other one that you mentioned was estate planning. So, one of the things that, if you think you need to leave your TSP to a trust, that's probably time to roll your TSP out because you cannot leave your TSP to a trust. So, let's say you have a adult child who is not able to care for themselves and you need to set this up in a trust that's going to be able to provide for them, or you want some type of control. That's what I always describe trust as. A will is I love you, here's some money, I hope you do a great thing with it. A trust is I get to control things from beyond the grave. And so if you need that control from beyond the grave, then it's time to roll your TSP out to something else that you can then leave to that trust or put into that trust.
and this is completely tangential, but I have an attorney friend who believes strongly enough that when you're at that estate planning phase and you're not talking about trusts, you're doing malpractice. Um, and I mean, on one hand, like I could beat him up and be like, that's just because you want people to pay you to make a trust. But on the other hand, like his arguments are actually very, very good in terms of asset transfer, privacy, probate, and everything like that. Like
Yep.
it actually makes a lot of sense. So I always found like the beneficiary arrangements of TSP both clunky and super simple. Like even if you didn't designate anything, it defaults to your spouse, which is
Right.
very similar to the majority of, actually pretty much all ERISA plans. I don't think I've come across a 4B that didn't have to get signed by spousal consent if we wanted to roll out. But on the other hand, I would say half of the clients that I see, there's no explicit designation there in terms of beneficiaries. And I just happen to know that there's a default behind the scenes. And when you want to do, and the part that I don't like, the more complex part is like when you want to add them, I have found that that's actually been very challenging for people to add beneficiaries or name even contingents and do any sort of more complex estate planning.
Right. So that would be reason number one, right? Estate planning. If you've got some needs along those lines, that's a reason to strongly consider rolling out of your TSP. And the second one is the one that you mentioned, and if you could talk a little bit more about, was that we want control over how we're going to, um, you know, spend that money to to start having that money withdrawn from the account.
Right. So fast forwarding to the whole conversation of that income phase. First, we're going to have a dynamic perception shift from accumulation, us saving for future spending, and then being in a world where now we're actually relying on that effort, right? Now we're actually spending down that nest egg, which you might not believe this, but that's actually a hard thing for people. And the majority of retirees, they spend what's their fixed income sources. So like their social security or pensions, that's their retirement income. And they actually don't touch their retirement assets unless they have a professional there nudging them to spend appropriately until, on Iris and, Uncle Sam come and say, thou shalt take money out of this account. And that's not the plan that you want to have. And I'm talking about required minimum distributions here. But when we're in that income phase and we're talking about, okay, well, this is the life I'm living and this is the adventures I want to go on until I'm not physically or my health can't accommodate that movement. We're solving for that income gap, right? So we're meeting our basic needs. One group calls it the minimum dignity floor, and I absolutely love that. And we're trying to take our assets. So the majority of people we're talking about here are going going to have some sort of pension, some sort of social security, some sort of VA disability that creates this guaranteed stream of income. So a tranche of your needs are going to be met by money that in most instances is completely guaranteed. I'm sure they'll find some way to break it somehow. Insert government shutdown here. But the gap of what you need at different times of your life is your income plan. Hey, our assets, those things that we save to put aside, think TSPs, Roth IRAs, non-retirement brokerage accounts, those things are going to meet that gap. So we need to create an asset and income stream to fill that. So that's the simplification of income planning in retirement or shifting to that income phase. And with the TSP, yeah, it has a great low cost, fundamentally good investment chassis. It's not that convenient for distributions. Now, sometimes I like to just distribute a year's worth of expected expenses or that expected gap in January from your IRAs and retirement accounts and stuff like that. And one distribution I think we can handle in a TSP. But if I wanted to do a monthly distribution, we go off the tracks real fast. So there's complications trying to make that distribution, right, Joe?
Right. And there's some psychology behind doing those monthly distributions. Most of us, had some type of monthly paycheck coming in or biweekly or whatever it happened to be
For
for our
40,
entire
50
lives.
years.
So if we can reset that up in retirement, it helps people spend more money. And the TSP doesn't really do a great job of that. The other thing is, quite frankly, you kind of have your go years when you first retire, right? And then you have your slow go years a little bit later. And then you have your medical bill years a lot later, hopefully, right? Well, the TSP doesn't necessarily do a great job. Like if you were to annuitize it, it would give you the same payment across all those years. When you needed more money, kind of if you can imagine a smile with the area under the smile as you're spending, right? You'd need more money in the beginning, you'd need a little bit less money in the middle, and a lot more money, hopefully not, at the end. And so when you look at that, if you just have a flat payout the whole time, that doesn't help with that, right? And so this is where, rolling it out often during those years provides you with the flexibility that you need.
Right. And at the end of the day, when we have these financial planning conversations, while I like to think, being a nuke, that it's always about optimization and being engineered to be the most efficient and effective plan, but the simple answer is we're trying to create options. If you're trying to receive benefits, you don't want to have this fixed income. Like you already have fixed income streams. Like if
Right.
you really want to set and forget it, great, but you're going to lose all of the cream from the crop of that coffee if in terms of tax planning and other sorts of planning, if we're just creating more income streams that are always taxable or not, because right, there's Roth TSPs now, but we want the options to increase either our gift giving capacities or our travel capacities, or hey, we actually want to save some of this more for the end of the threshold when we're going to have higher healthcare costs, or we need to cover long term care expenses so that we can actually age with some dignity. We want that control, and leaving it in the TSP at that point doesn't give us a ton of control.
Exactly.
Whereas with Roth, with IRAs, I mean, the word individual is the I in that, and it gives us a ton of individual control.
Yes. And I think that really kind of sums it up is TSP, great plan, great program, right? As far as they go, very low costs, great, good investment options, about as good as you can get. So early career, into early retirement, probably a great place to have your money. When you start to think about estate planning and withdrawals is when you need to start think about, is this going to meet my needs? And possibly there might be a better place to do it at. And then the real kicker kind of comes in when you really need that flexibility and you really need, and if you want to leave it to a trust, those are kind of the two places where it just tips the scale in favor of moving out.
Absolutely.
Even if early on you decide that you're going to move out, it's often worth leaving it open, leave $1,000, $2,000 in there, because if you get involved in a okay, that is not a great program from a subsequent employer, you have this as a fallback to roll that money into.
Hmm.
Does that sound like a good wrap up?
That's perfect.
So, with that in mind, you know, you can grow your finances confidently with guidance from the Military Financial Advisors Association. Visit militaryfinancialadvisors.org for free resources to help military families and veterans build wealth. Subscribe to our podcast for exclusive financial tips and updates tailored to military members, military spouses, and veterans. With these strategies designed for service members, you can achieve financial success. And remember, as your military service leads to that success, it will probably bring complexity. So make sure you choose a fee only financial advisor. You can find one to work with at militaryfinancialadvisors.org. They will help you not navigate that complexity. So to get started, visit us at our website. Thanks for joining us. And until next episode,
Subscribe, send us your comments, and we'll answer more questions.
The information provided on Service to Savings, the Military Financial Advisors Association's podcast, is for general informational and educational purposes only. Nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as financial, investment, legal, or tax advice, nor is it intended to be an endorsement or recommendation of any specific product, service, or investment strategy. Always consult with a certified financial planning professional, preferably an MFAA member, before making any financial decisions, as your personal circumstances, including military benefits, TSP contributions, deployment-related finances, or retirement planning may require tailored advice.